Good afternoon and good morning and good evening, maybe to some people out there right now. I wanted to welcome everyone to today's webinar, Enhancing Customer Engagement, Empowering Buying, Decision-Making, and Unlocking Revenue. Today, I would like to quickly introduce you to some of our presenters. Today, we have joining our panel discussion is Brent Taylor, who is VP of Strategic Sales and Business Development at Ricoh. We have Jeff Bartoletti, who is VP of Marketing and Commercial Operations at GE Vernova. And we have Gavin Finn, who is the CEO and President of Kaon Interactive, joining us today. Together, their industry knowledge and expertise will provide an amazing foundation for our discussion today, which is really centered around ways to empower buyers in their decision-making process. So Gavin, what I'm going to do is turn things over to you, and I'll let you guys get started for today.
Thank you, Dana. It's a great pleasure to be here and welcome everybody. I'm particularly privileged and honored to be joined by Brent and Jeff, who are indeed industry luminaries, and will provide a great discussion, I'm sure, for everybody today. We certainly welcome your questions if you would like to ask them, and Dana will moderate that later in the session. Just to get started, what we're really thinking about here is how the world has been changing and continues to evolve, and what that really means for marketing and sales and other functional leadership within large B2B organizations. And just to get things started, I think we're all facing very similar macro forces, one of which is that in our worlds, the buying process has become a lot more complex. And that complexity has come from the fact that there are more constituents in the buying process, and that the buyer's preferences have changed. And what that means for us is that there's lots of different channels in which we have to engage, that buyers and these buyer groups are operating in a way where they need to understand a critical value differentiation for every interaction that we have. And that what we really need to think about is how these and many other macro forces help us to realign our own internal organizations. So the focus for us really needs to be how we can bring marketing and sales together. And what's been happening in the last year with leading companies, and I think with Ricoh and GE Vernova, we have great examples here of this thinking and this paradigm shift around how to align marketing sales around a common objective. And I think everybody can agree in the last year, and probably for the next year, 2025 is probably going to focus as well in this area, that objective is revenue generation. Right? But it is how we get that alignment that I think is the most interesting aspect of this. The alignment is not around our own internal metrics and organization. It's around the customer's problem, and how we deliver value. So I think this is really the force or the series of forces that has brought us to this point, and where we all need to evolve. And that evolution involves technology, it involves processes, and it certainly involves people and culture and mindset. So I'd like to get started in this discussion perhaps by asking, let's start with Jeff. In this sort of continuous evolution of both macro forces and our own response to this, how do you see your organizations change in terms of those three or perhaps more dimensions, what you have to do from an infrastructure point of view, an organization point of view, people and mindset, to really help the customers understand your differentiated value so that you can really bring sales and marketing together, but also help customers in their buyer's process?
Yeah, thanks, Gavin. I think, the way we're approaching it, and that's what I can talk more about. It's easier for me to talk more about. I have a lot of ideas, but I can talk about what we're actually doing, because my team keeps me grounded in reality, and that's actually going to produce an ROI. So I think the key first approach is we've been lucky enough that our sales and marketing team are actually aligned, and we are, myself as the head of marketing, and are very tightly connected to our head of sales. And we've done that on purpose, and we spent a lot of time doing that because that connection has to be there. We have to have the aligned goals. There can't be this old, what I call it, the 1970s marketing versus sales. You know, that's got to be gone. I mean, that's fundamental right there. And then line on metrics. And today, you know, and I think it's really easy because this paradigm that you talked about in this shift really starts to connect ROI to marketing much tighter. And again, being aligned with sales, they love when you show, if I spend $1, how many dollars do we actually get closed won? Even though marketing doesn't own closing the deal, marketing's got to own delivering something that will enable a seller to close it faster, right? And I think that's the alignment. So I think it's first get that alignment between sales and marketing. That's got to go away. It's got to be tight, connected, aligned, metrics, KPIs aligned, done, right? And then it's really what we're doing is shifting more from this classic, what I call the demand generation waterfall of an MQL to an SQL to you know, and all of that stuff that's very structured, very kind of, today people call it old, right? But it's the way we're all still doing. We're still doing it. And we're in a transition though that we started this year to move more to a buyer group type waterfall, where you're looking at an opportunity and an account, and you're looking at people in the buyers group joining that opportunity, and how many people are engaging with that opportunity, and what's the intent that's going on at that account, and how is the customer engaging with us, or prospects or unknown people at that account engaging with us. And when you start looking at it from that perspective, it starts to change the way you create content in marketing. How is that content created differently so that the message is very targeted and very specific to that type of customer or that specific application? And then the first sales presentation, which we call the first pitch, which is kind of old sounding, but it's the first conversation we're going to have. How is that message tied directly to what they saw in the ad or saw in the campaign? And then when they start working with a salesperson engaging in a proposal, and the content of that quote, is all of that connected together? And that's hard. And it's a lot of lift, but I think the minute you start doing that, and we're kind of midway on the journey of doing this, we're starting to see the velocity and acceleration and more robust deals that close faster, and we're seeing that. So those to me are the two big areas, if that makes sense.
It's certainly incredibly exciting to hear, particularly in a large, well-established organization such as yours, that has, you know, a tradition and a process that might be hard to evolve over time. So that's really exciting to hear. And I know, Brent, you have both strategic sales, business development, but also some marketing operations and other organizations within the realm of your purview. And given the fact that you are both a manufacturing company, but also a digital innovation and transformation provider, it must be an interesting evolution from your perspective to bring these teams together around those kinds of insights. And where are you in that journey? And how have you sort of thought about bringing the customer focus to all of these teams as a driver towards revenue generation?
Yeah, it's a great question, and thanks for having me on. You know, like all organizations, the COVID pandemic had an escalation effect on all of this, right? We classify this digital transformation a lot, but how we communicate with customers, how you go to market, you know, our relationship with K-On became much stronger during that because of the tools and the solutions that you provide to Ricoh that are extremely valuable to us. But one thing that we've been on a very strong journey on for the last couple of years specifically is I have wonderful marketing partners, and that's both globally and in North America. And our connection points have become more often and more strategic for sure. And I think that we're a communications company. We're known for print, but we drive communications in all manner. And when we looked internally at ourselves, we realized that we needed to change the way we communicate to our own customers and prospects to maximize what this call is really all about, right? Maximizing return on investment and driving revenue growth, whatever you want to call it. And the partnerships between marketing and messaging and sales became stronger because of that. And we really swung from kind of a shotgun approach, sending out a broad message to a lot of people, to a much more ABM focused, account-based marketing focus, to drive specific messages into specific verticals or specific industries that drive greater results. Jeff touched on a number of key components too, that it's all around ROI now. It used to be we had a budget for marketing or sales enablement, and we spent that money any way that we saw fit, with the not as the wind blows, but there wasn't a real lot of focus to, is it generating return? And I can promise you today, the people on my teams that I'm blessed to be a part of, and even upstream to our executive management team internationally, the focus on ROI is very important. They want to track, the KPIs, as Jeff said. They want to make sure that results are being coming from the programs and the different communication apparatuses that we're using to ensure that it's good. So our sales cycles are longer. So marketing will touch these opportunities in multiple facets and multiple ways over that time. And we just want to see that the customer journey, how that's being impacted. I think that's where our adjustments are being made, is looking more towards attribution. What can we attribute the engagement to? Which vehicle of communication was most valuable? Around attribution, everybody immediately thinks Google is the reason that they came to your landing page, your URL, or whatever it might be. But that's just because that's the last click on the journey. It might have started with talking real old school, a white pages look, or a phone call. And that's what we're focusing on now, or the tools we're using and where we're investing, are they the right tools, and are they garnering results? So it changed a lot in the last few years, but we've really brought marketing and sales much closer together. It is a multiple times a week conversation that is happening in our organization.
What's interesting is, if you think about these kinds of conversations 10 years ago, it would have all been around MQLs and SQLs and leads,
right,
qualified leads,
Yeah.
and how, what we're spending to generate those leads and all of that. And it's a completely different conversation today, right?
Yeah, and your budgets, and I don't think our budgets have changed much, right, in all these years. So it really puts a lot of pressure on us to continually innovate and get creative on how we have more efficient spend, right? I hope many people on this call, maybe they're getting 20% extra marketing budget next year, but I know I'm not. And
I'm in the same boat.
Right. So that efficiency in driving, and I think from a buyer's perspective today, what's different than years ago too, it's not even probably even just 2 or 3 years ago, is the fact of, they're used to interacting with a supplier, especially in B2B, of getting an advertisement pushed to them, getting an email pushed to them, right? Getting a continuous stream of, what I always call polite persistence, right? Of shoving in your face of an email, and then probably a phone call. God forbid you click and fill out a form, because you're getting a call really quick to a company that really has that going. But today, even just in the past 2 years, what's changed dramatically is customers are more self-discovery on their own. They will not interact with you, right? They will not reply to your email. They will not answer your phone call, especially if you can even find a phone number for somebody today, especially with COVID, everyone working from home. Good luck trying to find some people's mobile numbers, right? So, so I think that has changed dramatically as well, is the fact that you've got to get creative, and you've got to put different assets out there for customers to really go on their own self-discovery journey, and because they're not going to listen to what you're pushing at them.
I think that's important. Sorry, go ahead, Brent.
I was just going to say that's a very important point that Jeff said. There is the education and the intelligence level around what they're in search of buying or acquiring, or services that they want to bring on board. Our prospects and customers are very educated in comparison to in the past. The sales cycle really started with, this is a football and how it's used and everything. Today, a lot of that journey's been taken on by the customer already. So wholeheartedly agree with Jeff there that that self-discovery and that looking into the process is a lot further down the road than you think when you're starting to engage a prospect today.
Well, what's interesting about that is that we've lost a little bit of control, right? We used to control that process. If you're sending them the message, you're controlling when you send the message.
Yeah.
If you're then making the phone call, you're in control of when you're making the phone call. What we now recognize is the customers are doing all of this discovery without us, whether we are participating in the process or not.
Right.
So the question is, how do we create a consistent set of messages that they understand in terms of the problem they're trying to solve and the value that we're trying to deliver to them, or that we
Yes.
can deliver? And the reason this is more complex is because something we both talked about, you both talked about here, is these buyer groups. They're diverse buyer groups. It's not one decision maker. It's not one problem dimension that they're solving. So if you're putting in place, for example, a large print infrastructure, there's a productivity and workflow perspective. There is a usability and ease of maintenance perspective. There's a sustainability perspective. And those are all different people with a different view of your solution. And they're all trying to solve an essentially a larger solution sort of set of problems, but they're looking at your solutions from their perspective. And what we have to do then is take the world of, as you just said, Jeff, they're out there navigating on their own, learning about our solutions on their own. We have to give them personalized, at least persona-based value stories. And we have to do it in a way where they can self-discover without an explanation from an individual or a salesperson. And then they're gonna engage. Then they're gonna either respond to a call or place a call or say, please help me out. And at that point, the individuals that we've been working with have to be able to be consistent with that message.
Yes. And I think consistency is the key, because if they go on their self-discovery and learn, and then the first interaction they have with you or with a salesperson or with somebody in your organization, and the message is different or disjointed or disconnected, or like don't, or goes all the way back up to the top, right? Where it's like, no, 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 I am, and you will lose that so fast, and they're probably ready to buy, and your salesperson, no offense, I was one for many years, could be the deal killer by the first conversation because they went back to the beginning, or their message wasn't connected to what they saw. And that's really hard. And it's takes a lot of, again, coordination and collaboration and very tight alignment. And what I will say is, again, we're a little bit on this journey. We're not all the way there yet. And I will say, start small and start kind of in one area. And be very focused and get a few wins there, and then grow it, because we tried to do it too broad with a big part of our industry. And we had to pare it down because we sell software products that go across multiple types of customers and manufacturing types. And so we could go really broad, but we started very focused and targeted.
I think that's your experience as well, Brent, right? You've looked at markets and product suites and then certain geographies and said, let's figure out how to solve this problem from a macro point of view first, in terms of all of the key factors, and then try to scale it, as opposed to let's try to get everybody to change all at the same time and try to adopt all of these tools all at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair statement. As Jeff's kind of describing more of a rifled approach, what we did in COVID is we launched several years ago now, but what we call our North Star process of engagement. And the first thing we did is we went out and found the 5 or 6 industries and verticals that we're really good at, where we know our value proposition delivers the outcomes that customers are looking for. We don't sell things, we sell outcomes and solutions. That's really the first step. And by going after those areas that we're really good in, we could get that rifled approach that Jeff's kind of talking about, and deliver the appropriate message so that sales is in step with the marketing campaigns, et cetera. We still use MQL and SQ, marketing qualified leads, sales qualified leads from a KPI standpoint, because that's the result that's still coming out of it. But from campaign development, et cetera, we focused into these industries where we're really good. The other thing I would say, to just add to this part of the conversation, is not only do we have to handle the buyers and the prospects that are much more educated, but then you have to manage your marketing campaigns and your sales enablement campaigns around the different generational groups that we are trying to communicate with. So you have the the people that are 20 to 30 years old that like to be encapsulated in a completely electronic engagement and don't necessarily want to meet in person and things. And then and that's where tools like Kaon and your interactive tools that Dana was showing on the screen a minute ago that we use around our largest products is very important. But then you have other people, it's like preference management that we do ourselves on just the stuff that we're printing to send to you. And please continue to select print. That is important to me. But we have to be able to deliver solutions around how customers want 100% digital interaction and those that want legacy interactions as well, because all the money spends the same, or all the money drives growth. So you have to be very agile, I think, is a good word in this environment as well, to take people to where it's going.
No question. I think one of the things to sort of reinforce and help sort of make that point even more resonant is in Jeff's world also, they have a wide spectrum of generational customers. And so even though the products that in this particular case, Jeff's focusing on are all digital products, they're working in manufacturing facilities. And sometimes those people have been in the plants for 30, 40 years. And then they've got the folks who are digital natives and they want to be engaging. And one of the things that I think you've told us, Jeff, that you've learned is that it's always some sort of a blend. There's some folks who want, a lot of digital and other folks who want a lot of human interaction, but it's very seldom 100% one or the other. There's a spectrum. And so part of that is you're training your sales team to learn different engagement methodologies as well. It's not, here's the tool and here are the features and functions of the buttons that you have to press, which of course is important, but it's also how do you engage with people in a multi-channel environment where sometimes you're going to be sitting down having a conversation and sometimes you might be on a video call like this one. And so that process is also multi-generational within our own teams as well, right? It's not just the tools that we provide and it's not just the messages, but it's also the methodology of engagement, right?
Yeah, and I think that is change management for sure. We used, it flashed up on the screen here, but we had a new offering that we had. It's complex, and it's regarding sustainability, and you can imagine that the knowledge you have to have behind that. And we have sustainability experts, and we need to figure out how to get their voice out in both our messaging as well as self-discovery, as well as our salespeople being able to have the conversation in a repetitive, consistent fashion. And the self-discovery tool that we created through Kaon, is great, and it tells the story from our experts, and it tells it the same way consistently every time, and from a customer's perspective, so it's easy to navigate. And then we found with a salesperson would walk in and have the conversation with the customer, they would just make up stuff and talk about what they thought they knew and all this. And we're like, why aren't you using the same self-guided tool that the customer probably already looked at? And you need to use that. And so it's been a change management function to say, stop. We actually hope we made it easier for you. Just use this and walk through the process with the customer, right? So it's just kind of like, the tool that a customer wanted to use, we couldn't get our sales team to use that same tool, right? And to make their life easier and to sound way more intelligent than they are, right? And no offense to them, but just about the application and about the details of it. So that change management, you got to build in time to do that, because there will be a time you have to make that shift, and you have to sell it internally to the people that are going to use it as much as you are going to have people use it on outside.
Jeff, those are great points, and I don't take any offense as the salesperson calling it out, because you hit the nail on the head. One of the things when you're changing how you're going to market and you're coming up with these campaigns and these new communication protocols, for lack of a better term, you have to also invest not only in your MarTech stack, but you got to invest in your people skills. So to follow up on what you're saying, we just went through a large investment about 10, 11 months ago, where we brought all of the sellers that I'm a part of, the teams I'm a part of, into one of our major facilities and tried to bring them back up to speed, because salespeople, when they've been successful, they don't like change a lot. And there's too much change too. But we also have to understand that what we did is not what we do and not what we're going to have to do to continue to be successful. Someone's going to move faster than you. So you can either be the leader in staying the best in the industry, or you can find out when it's too late that you didn't make the transition. And Gavin, I know in our conversations, I've used this analogy before, but the Gretzky analogy is not more pertinent than right here. You got to skate where the puck's going to be, as far as communication, marketing, selling, engaging with prospects, and not skate where the puck is, because sitting still is motionless and this thing's in motion. So you better get on the bus.
Well, I think that's one of the biggest changes, is that there used to be sort of step functions of change in our industry.
Mhm.
We would invent a new technology, a new product suite, the customers would be adopting it, and that would take 5, 10, 15, sometimes 20 years.
Right.
We'd
Right.
train sales teams to do that. There were methodologies, there were well-proven approaches. And then we would get a new step function. The market would change, or we'd come up with
Mhm.
technologies and we'd move up that way. That has really evolved into a much more rapid set of changes. So that 5 years might be 5 months. And what we really need to build is an expectation on the part of our teams that everything is going to change. So what we have to do is design these systems for change, right? Whether
Mhm.
it's our training programs or our go-to-market strategies or our tool sets. The key issue that I think is at the heart of both of these is when the customer, both of the points that you've been making, is when the customer has a need, a problem, the discussion has to shift completely around to be empathetic with their problem rather than the features and functions of our solution, right?
Yeah.
And so when we do train sales teams and when we do talk about self-guided tours, it's all about what's the best approach to help the customer understand the value that we bring to their problem. Sometimes that best approach is a conversation. Sometimes it's a self-guided, whatever, interactive experience, of whatever tools or videos we can create. But the point is to design it around that communication process rather than our need to communicate our message all the time.
Yes.
Right? And
Yeah.
that shift, if the sales team understands that and truly recognizes the benefit to them of shifting that, then I think that the methodologies we provide to them are much easier to adopt, because they recognize this is a way to help the customer as opposed to something that's I have to do to change, And that's really at the heart of everything that both of your organizations are shifting towards and have made significant strides towards, which is how to design every interaction around value.
Yeah.
And I think that's a part of, this.
And it sounds so easy, but it's super hard. Like,
Very
to
difficult.
get it consistent and stay with, they're like, well, we talk about problems, we talk about the outcome and the solution. Yeah, we do, but it's usually, like you said, in this pile of everything else that we know that we think we need to tell you. So it's super hard.
I think because we all suffer as marketers and as sales leaders, we suffer from the need to not leave any message unspoken, right? And I think the most effective value conversations are the simplest ones. And you talked about a complex solution that you bring, your proficiency software, which is the industry leading software, but there is complexity in the problem. And obviously there's
Yep.
ways of bringing, the solutions, tools and technologies to market there. It's breaking it down into some very easy to understand value stories that then lead to more technical discussions.
Yep.
And I think that's also a big shift. I know that, Brent, in your world, that's been a big shift from looking at
Big
the
shift.
speeds to starting with the value, and then people will uncover whatever the technical details are that are relevant to them, right?
Yeah, you said an important term a minute ago, empathic, and you said empathy, but to be empathic. And it used to be that a good salesperson was the one that had the most knowledge, right? That experience that came in and they robustly showed all that they know. And
Right.
I was raised by a World War II set of parents, and my dad had a great statement that he used for years. And he said, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth. If you use them in proportion, you're probably going to be in good shape. And it's really swung more to that side. We have to do more listening when we come in instead of speaking, because a lot of times salespeople or even marketing will assume you know what they need before you even engage with them, right? You're walking in with this predetermined notion that I'm going to sell them this, or they have to need X. And if you go in and you really open up the dialogue, first of all, you have to open up dialogue, listen to drive the value. But the second thing that'll happen if you slow it down and take your time a little bit, and salespeople hate to slow down because I need the deal, quotas due, I'm on the clock, whatever. But you slow it down, it'll grow, because the trust factor, the communication, the interaction will lead to a better outcome for the customer. Trust will elevate, and your ability to drive a larger solution. And you aren't doing it for that reason, but that will be an end result. The positive to us sellers is that the solution grows in scope and relationship, and then the stickiness inside the account becomes better. And then it leads to tentacles of other opportunities because they look at you as a true consultative type person versus somebody trying to move widgets out of the back of your truck. And that's the thing that we're fighting to get through now. Is we're value driven, we're outcome driven, we're expertise handling the different personas that you mentioned. I think that's critical.
There was a question that came in from Lena, and I think this aligns with the agility message we were talking about, and going to where the puck should be versus where you are right now. So what role is data and analytics playing in refining messaging strategies for you guys? How much are you looking at the data and making those shifts and changes in how you're reaching out to customers?
It's the hardest, one of the hardest, right? I know everybody probably has a perfect clean data set to work from. So,
that's sarcasm. I got it.
Yes. But we're using the data. The answer is in the data, right? So how you utilize that data and what you're using. So I'll give you some examples really quick. We're using intent data. So we are looking at, because a lot of people don't want to expose who they are either. They'll go for a long way with you. Gartner had a message a while ago that said no asset should be gated, right, on anyone's website. Well, as a marketer, I feel like I get paid on how many gated assets I have, right? But how am I going to know? How am I going to know, right? And we started ungating a lot of our assets. And the minute you start ungating your assets, you still want to know how people are interacting with your content. So there was one big piece of data that we didn't know, we didn't have. We didn't know how to look at anonymous data and information and actually even collect it. So we invested a lot of time in a system and in people that could understand how to analyze anonymous data and how to get intent data. There's some really good tools out there that do it. It's not that hard, but again, data is never clean, so it gets really hard really fast. And so that was one of the first areas where data is huge. Simple answer. Where we focused first was how do we start looking at anonymous engagement, and how do we understand that intent at our target accounts using anonymous data, which was an area we were not in. We were good at the gated asset. We captured you. We know who you are. We put you in a nurture sequence, right? We can look at you based on demographic and firmographic, and we can target you that way. Again, classic. But in this new world of anonymous and intent, how do I do that? That was one of our first areas.
Yeah. And just to piggyback off that, it goes back to what I had stated a little bit earlier, attribution, right? The data set's important. The most important data is that attribution piece. And in today's world, right, we're all worried about big brother information on giving up data, but every piece of data about all of us, let's be frank, is out there in the sphere already. But managing tools that can give you a heads up on who's truly engaging, no different than Siri picking up what you're saying when you aren't talking to Siri, and ads showing up on your system. Same thing holds true for us and other marketing companies, is trying to capture where that prospect is, what's really leading them, and trying to unveil who it is as soon in the process as possible, so you can do what Jeff says, get more pointed at their specific needs, their personas, their verticals, to nurture that campaign. But the net answer from my perspective is, how important is the data? It's critically important, because that's what allows you to determine when you tack the ship. This solution or this concept is not working. Let's tack the ship. Pull data, see the result is more important than the report, right? Yeah. You don't look at the data for the report, and sometimes leaders can get caught up in how pretty the report is instead of what the result is actually of it. let's talk about the outcomes, not about how pretty the slides are. And but the data is a critical aspect for sure.
That aligns with the next question that came in from a gentleman named Sajal. He texted it directly to me, but it said, how are you measuring the ROI of customer engagement and which metrics have been most effective for you?
So from my perspective, we use a lead generation tool. So let's say that there's some very large industry shows that we engage with. There were a couple large ones this year, Drupa in Germany, which happens every 4 years, and then Printing United in Las Vegas, which happens every year. And we use lead portal tools that capture an initial engagement. Probably is not an initial engagement, but on the floor, let's say someone comes up and shows interest. We then track that person and use other tools to see if they're progressing digitally with us. But then it goes to goes from an MQL to become an SQL, a sales qualified lead. The salespeople then engage that may not have been at the show, as this example. And as that process happens, we have tools that reach into our CRM to track where they are in the sales cycle. And then revenue is our ultimate tracking mechanism. That's the ROI, is did we generate a transaction or a services relationship, an annuity relationship that generated GP and then effectively impacts our bottom line positively. So we track it from initial engagement through the journey, and then we utilize revenue results or actual engagements that happen. And we touched on this in kind of the pre-call, but salespeople get nervous about engaging with the tools at times because they think they're going to be seen as they didn't drive the deal or they didn't make the result happen. Salespeople need to open up their minds and lean into support from sales enablement and marketing, because the village is going to bring home the results a lot sooner than a lone wolf hunter out on the plains. It's not the 1980s any longer. Use these tools to benefit yourself and your organization.
Mm-hmm.
Jeff, I think you had also talked a little bit about the attribution model changing to an influence model as opposed to a direct result.
Yes. Yeah. So how we measure ROIs, we do it in a few different ways because we're in a transitional period, but I would say primarily where we have been is what Brent just explained. We have every campaign we do, right? We have our CRM, and I guess sometimes it helps people when you tell them what you do. So we have Salesforce.com, and this isn't an advertisement for other people, but Salesforce.com, and then we have lean data inside there connected to do attribution modeling. So every campaign we release, we know how much we're spending on that campaign. And then we can, through attribution module, as leads come in, those MQLs, we can tell they touch these 3 different campaigns or these 3 different assets as part of this campaign. And this is how they became an MQL. So we can start to see, I spent this much, here's my MQLs I'm getting in. And then we can tie that to an opportunity all the way through to that opportunity being closed. So we do that all inside our CRM. Where we are shifting a little more so as we get into this buyer group concept and a different kind of waterfall is you're looking at it, yes, from that perspective, but you're really looking at it from a conversion rate perspective. So when you start really thinking of and velocity, so both conversion rate and velocity. So how many of these things that I'm generating actually convert to an opportunity, and how many of those opportunities convert to closure? And once we stop looking at the actual numbers and we still look at our actual numbers, but we start shifting a little bit of our focus. Brent said it, when you look at data a different way, we start looking at conversion rates and percentages, right? It starts to make you think a little bit different, right? Because then you start looking at aggregates and not, or looking at the actuals and not the aggregates only. Because you can have one big deal that gets you excited, huge ROI, right?
Yep.
And like, great, my marketing campaign delivered, and it's one big deal. But your engine, how efficient is your engine, which is the conversion rates and the velocity. So that gets back to that data comment too. So when you can start looking at conversion rates through that waterfall and the velocity, it starts to make you think about things differently and look for different areas to solve.
We use, and right with you, Jeff, we use sales velocity and conversion rates in all of our discussions around forecasting. We use our conversion rates against pipeline, and then we track sales velocity. And you are right, one big deal can hide it, right? I've said for long, revenue can hide sins. So you
Right.
gotta look at the data too. It's not just the bottom. You don't go to the bottom of the pricing sheet and go, that's good or that's bad. You got to look at all the things that happened before it hit the bottom.
The interesting aspect about this is that it's a combination of the direct attributable lead accountable data that's in your CRM stuff where we know who it is, and what you talked about earlier, Jeff, which is this anonymized set of data. And you have to recognize that in this new world, there's going to be an enormous amount of learning that happens in that anonymous world, right?
Yep.
So in that domain where people haven't identified themselves, they're going to learn a lot, right? So one thing that you have to think about is how do we combine the learning that they accomplish on their own, and how do we measure that, and then figure out what effect did that have on those sale velocity and conversion rates and everything else, because it's not just attributable to the specific leads that we know who they are. It might be somebody who's in our CRM, but they're not identifying themselves when they're doing all this stuff on their own, right? So I think what we have to be able to think about is effectiveness of each of these components, and then their contribution overall to the effectiveness of our systems. And I think that's a systems sort of theory way of looking at it, which is, as you said, Jeff, there's a difference between efficiency and effectiveness, right? And I think when you break down your buyer groups into personas, you also have to think about our systems that way. Different people engage at different times. And so you can't just say, if I take this out, is my sales system going to collapse? Well, some people will find a hard time getting the message because you took that one thing out.
Yeah.
Others will not. And I think this is where we have to recognize that it's those buyer groups that we have to understand and be empathetic with, and that the systems have to be, as you said, Brent, very eloquently, agile as well, because it's not one thing. You know, Jeff, you talked about all the different markets you serve. It's almost axiomatic that those markets are going to need different treatments, and that the roles within those different markets are going to respond differently to different systems. But you as an organization have to have one
Yes.
approach, right?
It does get super complex really fast, and it does force you to really be focused. And I would say that's where it was the hardest for us, but I think we're still on that journey. But once we started picking the one or two areas we're really going to hone in on and keep focused and keep doing all of our other stuff we were doing for there, but carve out that area to learn and to really be focused, we're seeing things now that we can apply in other places. A quick little example of that is, because we talk a lot about the different personas of a buyer, but in our industry, and I think it might be the same in others, is the new workforce coming into our areas is, we're not working any longer with people who have been in the industry and been in the space for 30 and 40 years. We're working with people who are in the space for a hot 5 minutes and then moving on, and then they're into another space, right? So, and what we started learning was that early career workforce coming into our space was starting to use LinkedIn. And we used to do the full funnel, top of funnel, and then middle of funnel and bottom of funnel, to try to walk them through, and spend a lot of money in LinkedIn doing advertising to, all layers of that funnel, to walk them through what we thought their buyer journey was. And what we learned was in this one industry space we were in, that the buyers were becoming younger and younger. I hate to use age, but it's more just early workforce, right? And they were using LinkedIn because as their consultant, they want to learn and be educated. They don't want to buy. They're not going there to push something to buy. They're going there as an education tool. So, and they can create a network and find their people that they make them look smart and learn from, because they don't know the industry and don't know the space. So we turned, in this one area, in this one industry, all of our LinkedIn advertising, we pared it down to like 3 things, and we used to have like 40, to just be educational. It was all educational. Here's your 3 quick tips to do blah, 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 right? Here's your 5. And we got such an enormous amount of click through, right? Or do you want to talk to a consultant, right? We started using words of, do you want to learn, things like that. And that shift changed totally. And we spent a lot less money in this one area, because we learned the demographic of the buyer was or the person that was engaging was not someone who knows anything about. They wanted to learn. So it was, once you get focused and once you pick a few areas, it allows you to go deep like that. which we weren't giving ourselves the space to go deep before.
Mhm.
Perfect. Well, we had one final question that came in is what training methods can organizations implement to enhance empathy and understanding in customer interactions? And I think you kind of just touched on that with your answer in a subtle way. But if anyone wants to put a little bow on that, I think that would be the last question for the webinar and we'll wrap things up. I see Brent, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, so I host a podcast and cover this a lot. That's not an advertisement for that, but empathy and building trust and building relationships. I say a lot of time this world needs a whole lot more we than me. We're in a very self-focused through social media. Everybody's trying to be something that they aren't. I call it fake book and insta scam, these social media deals, because there's just not a lot of reality there. And I think if we all lean into each other as individuals and try to understand their perspective. Forget it in a selling environment. This is just in the people environment with your neighbors, with your family, with your friends. The U.S. just went through a very contentious election cycle. I don't know if that's ever going to change back to the 80s that we liked, as some of us older folks on here. But the breakdown is just in the civility and discourse, right? Just engage with people. Now, as a seller, understand your customer's perspective, ask a lot of questions. Again, the 2 ears, 1 mouth in perspective. And then for leaders, I think that's an important thing to bring up. As leaders, what would I recommend around training? Find good coaching on relationship training. There's lots of people out there that are professional coaches that you can bring into your industry, your organization. And then the most important thing as leaders is to give time for the results to happen. This isn't a light switch approach. You've got to allow germination to happen here. So what we're guilty of in my industry after 35 years in it is we tend to knee jerk, right? We make another tack on the ship and you didn't realize that you were just coming over the horizon to where you were trying to get to. And then you reset the clock on that germination to happen you have to get your internal people to accept the change. And then you have to develop the messaging so that they can deliver your change messaging to the end customers. You got to develop skills on where the industry's going. So there's a lot to it. It's not my input would be, it's not overnight. You got to sign on for a year's worth of change here, not weeks or months. That would be my 2 cents on it.
I think that's a great point. Well, I wanted to thank you guys very much for participating in today's event and for wrapping this up. We're amplifying customer engagement, empowering buyers to make better decisions and unlocking revenue throughout the process of doing that. So I want to thank you guys for your expertise and knowledge today and sharing. And if anyone wants a copy of this presentation or session, I'm happy to share it with anyone after. Feel free to reach out to me via email. And thank you all very much for your time. Jeff, Brent, Gavin, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate the time, everybody.